Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jessica Brooks, the Educational Services Librarian at South Central Regional Library Council in Ithaca, New York. Welcome to the Community Engagement and Assessment webinar from the NY3Rs Association. If you have any questions or comments during the talk today, you can type them into the question area of the GoToWebinar command module, and I'll be monitoring those questions for our speaker. And now I would like to introduce Mary Carol Lindblom, who is the Executive Director of SCRLC. Hi, Mary Carol.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everyone out there. Greetings from beautiful Ithaca, New York, and it is a bit overcast, but still sort of sunny outside, and I hope it's nice wherever you are. I welcome you also on behalf of the NY3Rs Association, and for more information about the NY3Rs, visit www.ny3rs.org. And so it's wonderful to be able to invite Susan Curry to offer this webinar on community engagement and assessment. And it's part of our webinar series on practical library assessment. And the R in this case, is the NY3Rs. And this is an initiative that grew out of the Information Infrastructure of New York program, I2 New York, and assessment and really return on investment and outcomes and tying student outcomes to library services. All of those are pieces, and our data isn't doing us justice type things. So Susan Curry is here to speak about the community engagement and assessment aspect, which is just so key and so crucial. And we will have additional webinars coming up. So the next one will be on the 26th of June, and then there will be several in July on survey design and conducting focus groups. But right now, I'm not going to read you everything about Susan's background and her biographical information that is on the website. And Susan does have experience, huge experience, in both public and academic settings, and she's currently the director at Tompkins County Public Library, which is just literally, and I'm using that term correctly, literally just down the street from us on Cayuga. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to her so that she can spend the rest of the time on this.
Well, thank you, Mary Carol. I hope everyone can hear me. I think this is a fabulous series, and so I'm really appreciative of the NY3Rs and SCRLC and Mary Carol's efforts. There's a wide spectrum of topics for all kinds of libraries. It's very valuable. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. In libraries, we all think about assessment a lot, what to collect, how to present it, and often every one of us is so busy it can be difficult to have easily accessible templates for presenting information. And one of the things I always find is every library is unique and specific to the community they serve. So how the information is presented needs to be customized. I always love seeing what colleagues are doing. I learn from it, and I'm offering up what we did, and I hope that it proves to have some useful templates. You're free to use anything that we used here. I would like to emphasize my presentation is about our real-life situation at Tompkins County Public Library, and it's actually an outline of some of the assessment initiatives we've undertaken to demonstrate the value of the library to the community and to funders. So it's my hope that in sharing what we did with the assessment data that we collected, that I may be able to provide some templates that any library could utilize. So the examples that I'm going to share are for a very specific initiative that came about after a 4-year period of deep budget cuts, 2009, 2012. We all suffered cuts during that time. So my focus is really on the question of what do you do with information gathered? How do you present it to demonstrate and communicate your value and impact? So you can learn, let's see, there we go. There's advancing. You can learn more about our library at the website, but some very basic info is that we are the central library for the Finger Lakes Library System. We're chartered to serve all of Tompkins County. It has a population of just over 101,500. And our library was founded by Ezra Cornell prior to the founding of Cornell University. We celebrated our sesquicentennial last year. I think we're also a bit unusual for public libraries in that there are 5 other rural public libraries in the county. They're all wonderful, but they are not branches, so we have overlapping charter areas and we collaborate. We are in what is considered a rural part of the state, in Ithaca and the Finger Lakes, and only the city of Ithaca has a fairly dense population. So I've been at the library for nearly 6 years. This was my first public library job after nearly 30 years in 2 large academic libraries. I was used to having research and assessment departments within the institution and even within the libraries, and they were great. When I began here in late 2009, it was at the very beginning of the recession when public libraries saw their budgets cut deeply. And I had to hit the ground running in demonstrating the value for an organization that was focused on meeting the immediate needs of the community at a time of extremely heavy use with shrinking resources. So I had to develop a basic plan, first to attend to the library itself in terms of organizational culture, vision, mission, strategy, reconnect the library with our county legislature, which is the primary funding source, and re-engage and reconnect with the community. These are all real needs when I started here. And of course, as the recession deepened, there were a lot of assessment questions. I got them constantly. Everyone wanted to know what the value of the library is. What do I get for my taxes? Why should the library continue to be funded? These are very basic assessment questions. They were very unlike assessment that I was used to for academia. And just for me, this meant boots on the ground, a very practical operation. It meant that I had to identify pretty immediately what would demonstrate the value of the library. So it's what I often call functional assessment. And we used a variety of tools. I started with some really basic things. You all might have also considered as assessment tools, things that have probably been talked about in other webinars. We looked at our monthly statistics. They hadn't been reviewed in quite a while. I wanted to make sure we were counting everything we do from passive programming to social media to every way that we connect digitally to our community as well as physically. We annually review the statistics to be sure we're counting what we do every day. And for public libraries, all the statistics feed into a state report, but that report does not describe everything we do by any means. So I wanted to make sure we were really covering everything. So based on what I was hearing from members of the legislature and the community, I had to figure out how to demonstrate the return on investment for the library. It was a term that was very much used a lot about 5 years ago. So, and this was the value beyond the basic checkout and visitor number. So this slide is from one of our annual budget presentations to the legislature to demonstrate how much we save the community by using the library and to show that the return on investment is very high. And the way we got this was to use the library value calculator, and that's been around for a while. Each year we figure the cost savings of using the library to share with the funders. And I think a really important thing is to highlight that we're one of the original sustainable organizations in our community, as well as a major contributor to the new sharing economy. A lot of people think that's a very new trend, but libraries have always done that. So in terms of assessment, which utilizes the term measurable outcome, I think doing things like this, which is pretty basic, is a way of constantly demonstrating and emphasizing the relevance of the library to the community. This is a measurable outcome. So one thing that if you do use the library value calculator, I have to tell you our legislature loves hearing these numbers. One thing to note about determining is that you really have to be rigorous about the cost factors that you use and how they're applied, because you'll get questions. As I said, the legislature loves this information. They love being able to share it with their constituents, but they do want to understand how we reach our outcomes. So assessment can take many forms, and what I would like to talk about is what I mentioned earlier, is a very specific assessment initiative we undertook and some of the tools that we used. But I do need to provide a little background. So as I said when I began, we had some very deep budget cuts. They had started just before I began in 2009 and lasted to 2012. I know we're not alone, as this happened across the state with libraries. And after a couple of years of my spending time in lots of meeting with government officials, giving them lots of tours and presentations to any group on how the library is used, to anyone who would give me half a chance to talk, in 2012 I was invited to give a special presentation to the county legislature about the library and the effect of the recession on budget and staffing. We had seen a 15% reduction in staff due to the cuts, and the budget was at the level it had been at 6 years earlier. Having the opportunity to give a special presentation to the legislature was a really important turning point for the library, and that there was a shared understanding of the effects of the cuts and a publicly expressed desire to do more for the library. So the legislature, after that presentation, when I presented them with lots of our basic data, like the return on investment I just showed you, they voted to create a special working group to review the library budget and to make recommendations for the future. I know it sounds like I'm talking about budgeting instead of assessment, but this working group and the report were, in my view, a perfect opportunity to genuinely assess the place of the library in the community for funding. I believe it's important to assess any opportunity for long-term strategies, and this was clearly such an opportunity. So this county and library budget working group was a joint committee between Board of Trustees and the county legislature, met from January to May of 2013. They reviewed in depth all aspects of the library budget, the statistics, all of the funding models. They created a working group report, and this slide here is when the working group report was voted upon and accepted. So this was a very important turning point for us. It was an important assessment of the library itself for a number of reasons. It recognized that the library was efficient and a good fiscal agent, and that there was not an expenditure problem on the part of the library. It recognized that the community deserved and needed a 21st century library. And most importantly, the report recommended a community engagement process that would ultimately lead to a sustainable funding option, whether that be a tax referendum or for the community to ask the legislature to support the library at a greater level. And the reason I share these things with you is because we often think of library assessment only in terms of numbers and metrics, but something like the working group report, getting our legislature to engage with us to really review what was happening at the library, to assess what was happening, and to recommend the community engagement, I think was a really important assessment tool for getting the community to recognize what the library does. So we followed the working group report recommendations, and there's a link to the full report. You're welcome to read it. We really seriously embarked upon a community engagement process. So we're taking a two-step process. Again, it may not sound like assessment, but it was. We actually created a library strategy group to think about community engagement and assessment. The first part was our Board of Trustees and our Foundation Board of Directors in the library. The strategy group created a strategy group. And what we did is we decided that at first, the first part of our community engagement would be to create a high-level blue ribbon panel. And we would gather data for this group to assess the value of the library as a way of testing our assessment measures. So together we did a tremendous amount of work up front to structure the meetings and worked really hard to determine how we would guide the discussion without overwhelming everyone. We invited a mix of community leaders, some of you who use the library, and especially those who don't use the library. The community Blue Ribbon panel included vice presidents from academic institutions, a president of a local PTA, the owners of local businesses, not-for-profits, and the full range. So these Blue Ribbon panel meetings were designed to engage participants in a discussion about the library's vision for the future and the funding constraints. We looked to them to help provide influence when we shared the assessment data with them, and to help us with some strategic problem solving. So the great thing about the Blue Ribbon panel is that they were, as I said, a beta test for us. We knew the data we collected and the information developed could be expanded for a greater community engagement process. We knew that we deliberately picked some people who had criticized the library in the past. We knew that we would have intensive questioning from the group that would help us identify what information we needed for a larger community discussion. The assessments that we decided to undertake that I will talk about today are three. There were many, but I'll talk about three specific: a survey, a benchmarking study, and a better presentation of data already in hand. For the meetings of this Blue Ribbon panel, we deliberately chose to have 4 very structured meetings to present the data. This was very carefully organized by us. So I want to just give you an idea of some of the data and present it to the Blue Ribbon panel. And I'm just going to share the agendas for the first 3 meetings with you so you can see some of the things that we did. The plan we developed included an overview of where we are in the library, where we want to go, a discussion of what libraries around the country are doing. You can see how we decided to guide the discussion about the information presented. And one of the things we did was develop a communication strategy. We made sure to share all documents that we created with the county, the city, the town, our boards, the friends, the library staff, and other community leaders. We strategized at length about the best way to push the information out. We wanted to be succinct, but we wanted to use a variety of visual and infographic type documents. In each meeting, we took careful note of questions, and we created a frequently asked questions document. I didn't include that, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to share with you. It's about 10 pages long, and we use that document a lot. And that the FAQ is about what does it mean to be the central library of a library system, those kinds of questions. So after each meeting, we would update our FAQ. So the chart at the very bottom of this page was actually the agenda of the 3rd meeting. Rather than just a text-based agenda, we created a visual infographic of how we wanted to guide the discussion. And then for the meeting, we actually filled out all the blanks in that agenda. So the next 3 slides that I have are about the presentation of the data that we gathered, and we worked with our academic institutions nearby for the benchmarking study and the community perception survey, and we worked with a local graphic designer for visually presenting funding. So let me just start. I'm going to start first with the infographic about our funding. I will say that for, the infographic actually is a full page. It's very big, so in order to show you all the detail, I split it into half. So this is the top half of the handout. And, public libraries don't get a lot of funding, but they have incredibly complicated funding streams. And that was surprising to me when I started here. So we had a lot of data about our complicating funding that included public funding, private funding, the foundation, and this is one where we worked with a local graphic designer to develop a 1-page infographic that we could use to explain our funding, where we are, where we want to be. And this is an example of using the data in hand. It was a better presentation of data that we already had about our complicated funding. So we tested this on our Blue Ribbon panel, and they very much liked it. We also used it with the legislature, county administration, and we're in the process of updating it so we can use it with the public to explain our funding. So this is the top half, as I said, and this is the second half. Now, this was done back in 2013 to demonstrate the budget deficit that was identified in the 2013 working group. It also was a visual way to present the growing needs as well as potential solutions. So it really resonated with everyone that we showed, and we will be, as I said, we're updating that because I'm happy to say things have improved. I'll get to a results page. The next part of it is, this was data that we already had in hand along with the return on investment I showed you earlier. But we also worked with the Cornell Johnson School of Management to do a benchmarking study. Their graduate students are required to complete a real-life benchmarking study, and we really needed this for our Blue Ribbon panel and assessment. So this is a slide from the executive summary. What this benchmarking study did was to compare our library to quite a number of libraries, and the major points of the study were that they looked for was funding constraints that limited our leadership position in the community. The benchmarking study noted that our collection expenditures and our digital resources are below peer libraries, but engagement with volunteers and marketing outreach exceed peer libraries. The new sources of revenue and funding, are needed to maximize our impact on the community. We showed the full benchmarking study to the Blue Ribbon panel, and it really, the data was very well done. They were struck by the larger share of state funding that the other peer libraries had, and the larger budget that peer libraries have on average for technology, and the significantly larger private dollar fundraising that our library has in relation to most peer libraries. We have a great, wonderful development office here. So the benchmarking study was had a lot of data in it that we parsed out for the Blue Ribbon panel, but it was a great way to demonstrate to them that we had, in fact, looked across the state, looked across the country to find libraries that we could compare ourselves to. That's often a question you get from the community is, well, what are other libraries doing? I just want to mention that we noticed that the Ferguson Library was included in the municipal libraries with a smaller population, and it was wonderful to see that they had just won a great award for all the work that they did. So I also mentioned a community perception survey, and we used we undertook a county-wide community perception survey to share with the Blue Ribbon panel, and we're using the data from that beyond that Blue Ribbon panel with the community. The goal was to learn how the residents of Tompkins County valued their public library, what they valued the most and the least, and we wanted to know if they were aware of our funding limitations, because remember, this community engagement process came out of the recommendation of a working group that wanted to look at sustainable funding options. So demonstrating the value of the library through this community perception survey was really important. And we wanted to demonstrate and ask, does the community support a strong and vibrant library of the future? This is something our legislature would like to know. So we worked with the Cornell Survey Research Institute for an objective scientific survey, not just us calling people and saying, do you love your public library? It was a telephone survey of mobile and landline numbers via random selection method. And we actually based this on the Pew Internet and American Life project, how Americans value public libraries in their communities. That's something we follow regularly. So we based our survey on that. And as you can see, we got some very valuable information. And having 86% of the respondents indicate that if the library closed, it would have a major impact on the community was a really important assessment statement for us to use with our legislature and also with our donors. So we are still in the process of collection data. I gave you those 3 examples, those slides. I have a lot of information. I get excited about the library. I want to share it, but I limited myself to the 3 examples of the data collection we use for our Blue Ribbon panel. We're going to build on that, and we're looking at the next part of our community engagement. So we want to refine all the collection data we have and update our documents. The Blue Ribbon panel meetings finished, and we presented a report to our county. But the document here I'll talk about in just a minute, we wanted to figure out what do we do next. We got a lot of good data. We gathered a lot of data for the Blue Ribbon Panel. We got a lot of good information from the Blue Ribbon Panel. What next? So we have a Community Relations and Outreach Committee, and we're taking all of that data and information and developing a strategy for broadening the community engagement. So we're going to be looking at branding and marketing. So to get to that, we created 2 additional documents, and this is the first one of those 2 documents, a key stakeholder analysis and strategic direction. So you may have done a key stakeholder analysis before. I think this is a really important thing for any organization to do. We've worked in our board meetings, we've worked in committee meetings on this document. It's a blank template that you could use. We grouped audiences into several categories, and we assigned priorities for messaging. The inside-out approach is what we're taking. We evaluated these audiences in connection with our community engagement process and the vision for a 21st century library. And we actually have a full document. This document is completely populated, and we spend time discussing and updating it. We also created a template to work on our strategy for the next 3 years, and this is a sample. I just put in a couple of examples to demonstrate the kinds of initiatives our library is working on. So it's different from our long-range strategic plan, which outlines the mission and vision. This is what we're using to plan the specifics of getting there. So we used this document and created a very detailed strategy for the next 3 years to include any conclusions and decisions needed for supporting the vision and the mission. And mainly we're looking at, again, establishing sustainable funding. We want to increase private dollar engagement. We want to create revenue-raising opportunities, because our community engagement process is focused on that working group report for sustainable funding. So the framework here would include any collaborations or agreements for the future of the library. So, we collaborate very closely with our county about county support, increased staffing, and if we wanted to do more, what would be the strategic steps needed each year to realize those plans. And you may see that the Campaign and Annual Fund, our foundation, had been planning a capital project campaign to do some improvements, much needed improvements here in the library for a teen center and a lab, and so we folded that right into our strategic planning and data collection for looking towards sustainable funding. So we did a lot of work over the last year and a half, last 3 years actually, if you include before the recession, and the working group report. And the results actually have been very good. I mean, we were really worried about our library. There was 1 year early on where we were worried about maintenance of effort as the central library, but our county legislature really responded to the data that we collected and the presentation, and they have been wonderful in supporting the library. We're very grateful. They're actually one of the most supportive legislatures in the state, and they have restored a lot of the funding to earlier levels, not quite back where we were, but significantly higher than we had been. They're working with us to ease the deficit caused by the recession. So we felt that our assessment and community engagement through the Blue Ribbon Panel, and we expect that it will through the next part of the community engagement, to be very successful. We do still need additional staff, and as I mentioned, our foundation was working on a campaign. We have successfully launched the public phase of that campaign, so we're absolutely on the right path. Our funding this year is looking better and better. I believe that it was our hard work at gathering data for assessment and presenting that value of the library that was so essential in the restoration of the funding, and the willingness for the county to collaborate with the library for ongoing sustainable funding. So I have a lot of sources listed here, and in summary, I'd like to say that when I began, this is a very customized view of assessment that I provided. Because I think that often we're working within budget constraints, but we're also talking about assessment. So what do you do with assessment within the context of budget constraints? I wanted to just show you some of the tools that we use to navigate through the recession and restore the funding and launch a campaign. So I know there are so many amazing resources offered through this series, and some of the ones that I have listed here maybe have been mentioned, but I did want to just point out a couple of additional things that we use that we're looking into to add to our growing body of information to utilize. One is the EDGE initiative. You may have heard of this resource, which assesses public technology services. We have participated in this. We completed our initial assessment, and there's a lot of data to analyze, strategic planning tools. And since we are looking to have create a 21st century lab in the library, we'll be using the tools from that. There are a lot of assessment tools out there. For example, the Pew Internet and American Life Project. You may already be following that, but that's one I believe has an enormous amount of data for libraries. And I think I mentioned that we modeled our survey on the one conducted by Pew. Another one is the 2014 Aspen Institute report, Rising to the Challenge, Re-envisioning Public Libraries. Something I look at a lot is the Library Journal Index of Public Library Service. There was one that came out in November of 2014. And actually, one of the things that I found very helpful in the Library Journal Index is to think about assessment terms differently for public libraries. So, for example, we often think, inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And I like to think about it a little bit different way. It's, I think it's more to think about library resources, library services, and the user change. That's an easier terminology for libraries. So, for example, library resources might be your collection funds. Library services is making the collection available, and the user change is the amount saved by the public in using the library. And the last thing I'll say about these sources is that I recently attended a workshop on evaluating your organization's effectiveness, and I thought it was going to be about metrics and assessment, but it was really from a donor's point of view, which I think is important for libraries. I learned about not-for-profit sites that offer very valuable assessment insights about organizations, and I listed one here, GuideStar. It focuses on making information about not-for-profits available to donors. So you might go and look up your library and see what they say. I mean, I saw that we don't have a lot filled out there, so I'll be filling that out. So assessment can cover many different areas, and you can find lots of different resources. In many ways, I think customizing it for each library is really important. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today, and appreciate the opportunity to share with you what we did. We've been very successful with the tools that we used, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and just want to say thank you to SCRLC and the NY3Rs. Thank you.
We had some feedback from somebody in the audience who said that the GoToWebinar had crashed for them and they had missed several slides, and I don't know if that was just one person or multiple people, but in case that happened to anybody else, we are recording the session and it did not crash on my end, so you will get a link to the full recording after the session if you missed anything. And we have a question from Mary Lou Carolan who says, okay, we want to launch into this process. What do you recommend are our first 3 steps to take to get started?
The first 3 steps? Here's what I did was I really looked at the statistics we were collecting because there were basic things like circulation and your people connecting to the catalog and the web, but look at every single way you connect with your public. For example, when I did a presentation to the legislature, they were used to seeing website hits and circulation checkouts, but when I looked at, we're connecting through our book lists, novel lists, social media, all of the things, every way that we connect with people digitally and they use the library is using the library, even if they're not in the library. And we had over 1 million hits on various things. That was a big number for them. They were surprised at that. So look at your own statistics for evaluation. And I think that library value calculator, you have to be careful with it. And it really is great for measuring return on investment. I'd be happy to show you what we did. I think the other thing is connect with your funding source and find out what their questions were. Ours was focused on what our legislature wanted to know. They wanted to know what's the value, what value does the library bring the community. Some of them wanted numbers, some of them wanted stories. So looking at your own internal statistics, figuring out the return on investment, and if you can work with a visual designer to explain your funding sources, that was tremendous. Instead of just showing them a pie chart of the budget, showing them the percentage, that infographic. I'm happy, as I said, to share anything we have with anyone who's interested. But those are the things that we did right away. I asked a lot of questions. What do you want to know? I mean, one of the questions that I got early on is, how are you using volunteers? So I made sure that I include in the information we share with them that we have the equivalent of 5 full-time equivalent in the number of volunteers. So get the questions that they want answered first, and then look at your data, look at the return on investment. I'm happy to talk by phone with anyone if you'd like.
Jay Blackburn says, I just wanted to say I showed the value calculator on the website to 2 of my classes, one with MLIS students and one with librarians, and everyone loved it. It's a great tool.
It has been. Every year we're actually getting ready for our annual. We're fortunate to be able to give a pre-budget request presentation to our legislature. We invite them over. We show them if they gave us money for special things, like this year they gave us funding to replace our security gates. We make sure to show them what they love seeing that what they give us being used in positive ways. They don't want to just hear about we don't have money. They want to know what we're doing that has impact. And they love coming over, and they loved using the value calculator. The first year we showed them how to use it, and I almost thought I wasn't going to get to do the rest of the presentation because they kept wanting to put numbers in.
Mary Lou Carolan wants to know, how do you assess and also demonstrate the value of our library programming?
The programming, we actually have that on our value, on our library value calculator, and I don't have that right in front of me, but we actually did, our librarians did research on the cost to attend certain community programs, and they have a price on that. And we count the number of programs and the number of attendees, and we actually put a price on what it would have cost people to attend these programs if there had been a fee charged. I can send that to you if you, I think my email is on the webinar page, first page, or if not, let me see, I think I have my email here. Nope, I don't. Anyway, I can send that to you. We did find a price. And it did demonstrate the return on investment for the programming. I think, too, though, one of the things to be careful with assessment, we do have a lot of people in the community who want to know a dollar value of everything. And I understand that. And that was something that when I first started working with our legislature and they ask about return on investment, what do I get for my money? Demonstrating that value is essential. But there is the qualitative analysis that's important as well. That having the library in the community makes the entire community better, and I think that can't get lost. It's important to stress that as well.
Mary Carroll from SCRLC is asking if you had any major surprises going through this process.
I did. When I first got to the library, I was surprised at the questions I got. That's why did summarize it very quickly, but when I first started here, I loved the library. I was excited to be in the public library. I was surprised it was at the very beginning of the recession, I was surprised by the number of times I was asked, why do we need a library in the digital age? I thought that was long past. And in the recession, there seemed to me at the beginning of it, there were a lot of questions about a public library. That everything's on Google, all the free books that you can get. I can look everything up on my phone. What value does the public library bring to the community? I was surprised by that, but also saw it as a wonderful opportunity to remind the community of why public libraries are so important in our society and our community. And I see that happening nationally now. One of the things that we see almost daily, if not weekly, is some news article about the importance of libraries. If you look at what's happening in New York City, where there's a lot of information about supporting the libraries. So libraries are coming back around, I think. People are starting to see their value. But during the beginning of the recession, I think there was a lot of questioning, and I was very surprised by that. So I liked getting the data to demonstrate. It was very easy to demonstrate the value of the library when you started collecting the data and presenting it.
And that kind of ties into Jay Blackburn's question, did you meet significant opposition changing to this collaborative process with the legislature, et cetera, from the former adversarial process?
So I would say they weren't necessarily adversarial. They simply, they said, you get enough money. I'm like, what? What do you mean we get enough money? They simply didn't see where the library, they had a very traditional notion of the library, and so that's why I spent a lot of time giving them tours and getting them to think about the library as beyond books on the shelves. That libraries have always been institutions that provided literacy support and education. I thought a lot about how we termed things. What's the terminology? Story time sounds like a pleasant hour with stories being read, but it's actually literacy programs. So I call it our early childhood literacy programs for them. I think it's important for them to understand what are the underlying principles of libraries and what they bring to the community. So I had to spend a lot of time listening, a lot of time giving them tours. Every opportunity I could, I gave them a presentation, reminded them that we are their library. We're here to help them with research. And so I spent an enormous amount of time between 2009 and 2012 doing outreach specifically with the legislature in every way that I could think of. I did a presentation to the local real estate agent and said, if you're selling houses in Ithaca and Tompkins County, here's why you should include the library. I did a presentation to every Rotary Club I could. So I gave a lot of presentations on the library and how it had changed in the digital age. That got back to the legislature, and they began to see the value. So they've always supported the library. It's never that they didn't support the library. I think that they, in the recession, it was easy to say, oh, the library will always be there no matter what. We don't have to give them as much money. One of the things we emphasize to them is that they may cut our resources, but we don't see a reduction in the number of people served. We still see them. I made sure we took pictures of every winter's day we were open, that they could see that there's a really important place. And then they began to advertise the library themselves, and that was a great turning point for us as well.
Jay had clarified not that the legislature was being adversarial, but that the library approached it as a fight to prepare for.
Yes, we did. I did. Thank you, Jay. I thought, I could see what was happening in public libraries across the country, and in the county we have these great county rural libraries here, and we were all struggling with funding. And I did see it as a challenge, I guess, more of I believe in libraries. I feel passionately about being a library. And I felt like it was a challenge, and it was a challenge that we were more than up to demonstrate to our county legislature and to our community the value of the library. And I feel like we are wildly successful. Our programming statistics have increased double-digit for the last 6 years, and it is starting to pay off. We're at a good point in our campaign, and as I said earlier, our legislature has really been tremendously supportive of us.
Susanna Gall says, please convey to Susan greetings from Binghamton University Libraries.
Oh, I had a great experience at Binghamton University. That's really a great library.
And Mary Lou Carolan had followed up with saying thank you, and she would love to get your information, and she imagines with programming our library members' stories would be very effective. So I'm going to type your email into the chat box if you don't mind.
No, please do. I'm happy to share anything I have with anyone. I think that's one of the best things that libraries do for each other is we share all our information so that we can all succeed together.
I agree, and I enjoyed that infographic as well.
I think he did a fabulous, as Brian did love. He's been. I thought it was a terrific infographic. It really spoke to people. I thought it was pretty amazing. We don't get millions and millions of dollars, but that's a pretty complicated budget to explain.
Yes,
sure
definitely.
Everyone has that, so yeah. So please feel free to use it.
Yeah, and when it works well for the public as well as for board members, that's great.
Yeah.
Susanna's asking, could you display the infographic again? Would you mind just going back to that slide real quick?
Sure. It's displayed in two, oops, this is the top half of the infographic, and I'll just talk about, so we showed the public, all of our public funding, private, and then this was again in 2013. We were trying to show that the library budget was really in trouble because we were drawing down from our fund balance. And I just say a word, I hope I'm not taking too long, but often, I don't know if other libraries get this question, but we get a question like, well, just increase your overdue fines. And of course, overdue fines are never a source of revenue. They should never be. They'll eventually go away in the digital age, and they're starting to decline as ebooks increase. So I did a lot of work with the legislature to get them to stop thinking of fines and fees as a revenue source. So this is the top half of the infographic, and the bottom half is how we explained our operating deficit and what we had to do, what was happening to the library. Meeting what from our long-range plan, the community needs that we had, that we needed to meet, and then what we thought a sustainable funding model would be, and our 21st Century Library campaign. So we had a pretty significant budget deficit when this model was done. We don't at this point, which is, I think, a great success.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it, and I'd love to talk with anyone and find out what they're doing. I haven't met any librarian yet or seen any library that isn't doing something interesting, unique, and valuable. Thank you.
So we will be
sending out... Susan.
And we'll be sending out a follow-up survey for today's presentation as well as a link to the recording. And as Mary Carol mentioned earlier, we're going to have another webinar coming up in the series on June 22nd from 10 to 11 a.m. And it's called By the Numbers, Quantitative Assessment in Libraries with Wendy Ackerman. So have a good day, everyone.
Thanks for correcting the date, Jessica. Because I had given you the wrong date. I had said the 26th, and it's very much the 22nd.
Okay.
So I appreciate that, and Wendy Ackerman will also appreciate that.
Yes, and we will be sending out that information in the follow-up email as well.
But thanks to Susan and for everybody for attending this afternoon.
Have a good day, everyone, and I'll
Thank
now
you.
end the webinar.